Common Sense and Nuclear Warfare by Bertrand. Read by the author. Introduction. It is surprising and somewhat disappointing that movements aiming at the prevention of nuclear war are regarded throughout the West as left-wing movements or as inspired by some ism, which is repugnant to a majority of ordinary people. It is not in this way that opposition to nuclear warfare should be conceived. It should be conceived rather on the analogy of sanitary measures against epidemics. The peril involved in nuclear war is one which affects all mankind and one, therefore, in which the interests of all mankind are at one. Those who wish to prevent the catastrophe which would result from a large-scale H-bomb war are not concerned to advocate the interests of this or that nation, or this or that class, or this or that continent. Their arguments have nothing whatever to do with the merits or demerits of communism or democracy. The arguments that should be employed in a campaign against nuclear weapons are such as should appeal with equal force to Eastern and Western blocs and also to uncommitted nations, since they are concerned solely with the welfare of the human species as a whole, and not with any special advantages to this or that group. It is a profound misfortune that the whole question of nuclear warfare has become entangled in the age-old conflicts of power politics. These conflicts are so virulent and passionate that they produce a widespread inability to understand even very obvious matters. If we are to think wisely about the new problems raised by nuclear weapons, we must learn to view the whole matter in a quite different way. It must be viewed, as some new epidemic would be viewed, as a common peril to be met by concerted action. Let us take an illustration. Suppose that a sudden outbreak of rabies occurred among the dogs of Berlin. Does anybody doubt that Eastern and Western authorities in that city would instantly combine to find measures of extirpating the mad dogs? I do not think that either side would argue. Let us let the dogs loose in the hope that they will bite more of our enemies than of our friends. Or, if they are not to be let completely loose, let them be muzzled with easily detachable muzzles and paraded on leashes through the streets so that, if at any moment the enemy should let loose its mad dogs, instant retaliation would follow. Would the authorities of East or West Berlin argue that the other side could not be trusted to kill its mad dogs and that, therefore, our side must keep up the supply as a deterrent? All this is fantastically absurd and would obviously not occur to anybody as a sane policy, because mad dogs are not regarded as a decisive force in power politics. Unfortunately, nuclear weapons are regarded, quite mistakenly, as capable of securing victory in war, and because they are so regarded, few men think of them in a manner consistent with sanity or common sense. Let us take a perhaps more apt illustration. In the 14th century, the Black Death swept across the Eastern Hemisphere. In Western Europe, it destroyed about half the population, and in all likelihood, it was about equally destructive in Eastern Europe and Asia. In those days, there did not exist the scientific knowledge necessary to combat the epidemic. In our day, if there were a threat of such a disaster, all civilized nations would combine to combat it. No one would argue. Perhaps this pestilence would do more harm to our enemies than to ours. Anybody who did so argue would be considered a monster of inhumanity, and yet neither the Black Death nor any similar pestilence has ever offered as terrible a threat as is offered by the danger of nuclear war. The countries of NATO, the countries of the Warsaw Pact, and the uncommitted countries have precisely the same interest in this question. The same interest, in fact, as they would have in combating a new Black Death. If this were realized by the statesmen and populations of East and West, many difficulties which now seem insuperable or nearly so would disappear. I am, of course, supposing that the point of view which I am advocating would be adopted by both sides equally, given a sane and sober consideration of what is involved. This harmony on the problems of nuclear weapons would inevitably result. It would not be necessary to invoke idealistic motives, although they could be validly invoked. It would be necessary only to appeal to motives of national self-interest.